This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, this is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome once again to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks, events, happenings in the world, happenings in politics, in the media, and we look at them from a higher perspective. We take a step back. We take a look at what these stories are telling us about ourselves and how they can lead us to an expanded awareness of our highest selves and a real understanding of who and what we really are, which, in my belief, is oneness, connectedness, and for lack of a better term, divine mind. And this has been a very tough week. This has been a week when I personally have found it very challenging to do what I do on this show, which is to take a higher look at things that are going on in the world. It's very hard to do that when certain buttons get pushed. It's very hard to put into perspective the understanding that we are creating these incidents, that at the highest level of our being, they are illusory. They are sort of holograms that we create to interact with and to get involved with for our own sense of growth. And this week was particularly challenging for me to apply those principles. And the reason for that is two very shocking and provocative happenings in the news this week. One, of course, is the ongoing story that is happening in the town of Ferguson, Missouri, in which a black teenager named Michael Brown was killed by a police officer, shot 5 times. And the result... Now, by the way, this incident happened more than 2 weeks ago. And the result has been protests. Some of them got a little out of hand. Some of them got a little violent. At which time, and this was about 2 weeks ago, when civil rights leaders, including some of the biggest names in the civil rights movement, came down to plead, cajole, even do a little finger wagging to keep the residents of Ferguson, who are, largely African American, and understandably very upset about this situation, to keep calm, to do this the right way, to do the protest, but to do the protests in the spirit of Martin Luther King, in the spirit of nonviolence. And it took, a visit from people like I'm sorry, I'm choking up a little bit. It took a visit from civil rights activists like Al Sharpton to try to calm people down, as well as the family of Michael Brown. However, these protests were then met with a response from the police department, which, by the way, the Ferguson Police Department is mostly white. And the tension between that local police department and the citizens they are sworn to protect has been palpable for a very long time. This is not something that just kind of blew up overnight. The incident, of course, triggered it all, but this is something that has been brewing for quite some time. In any event, the police department met these protests with a level of military armed response that was mind-boggling. I don't think people even knew they had the kind of tanks and assault weapons and military invasion type vehicles that they had. But that's exactly what they had. And the scenes earlier this week were astounding. It was very much like a military invasion rather than a police situation in which they are keeping protesters in line. Now, you may... I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm assuming that you may or may not know all the details of what happened. And there's a good reason for that, because these details have been sketchy. We didn't even know the name of the police officer who committed this act until just a few days ago, when they finally released the name. And they said they released the name because they felt that they didn't want to endanger this officer's life, and they felt that his life might be in jeopardy given the state of things in Ferguson. But they did release his name now, and the Ferguson Police Department has changed their story several times about what happened that night to this young man. And so that's why we have not been able to get a lot of full details about what happened. There's investigations now, and I think a federal investigation on top of it, which are starting to reveal more information. But now, from what I can gather, here's the latest timeline. The latest timeline is that this young man, Michael Brown, who is a student, by the way, and was visiting his grandmother in Ferguson. Now, there's video footage of him going into a store. And the store was Ferguson Market and Liquor. That's a convenience store. And on the video footage, Brown goes in with his friend, with him. And he grabs a box of cigars. And there's some sort of an altercation as the clerk argues with him. Boxes of cigars fall on the floor. Brown picks the cigar boxes up and the clerk tries to stop him from leaving. But Brown intimidates him and shoves him into a snack display. And Brown leaves carrying about $48 worth of cigars. Now, why he did this is going to remain a mystery, I'm sure. I have no idea why. But that certainly is a crime, and that certainly is something that would have to be investigated. But what happens after that is kind of mind-boggling. He walked down the street called West Florissant Avenue with his friend, and then this police officer in a patrol car. The police officer's name was Darren Wilson. Pulls up to them and tells them, this is according to Brown's friend, who is a witness, and apparently says something along the lines of, "Get on the blank sidewalk." And they, I guess, apparently, it looks like his friend told him that they were almost home. Then the officer backed up, pulled in close to them, and through the window of his cruiser grabs Michael Brown by the throat. Michael tries to move away, and the officer grabs his shirt. Again, this is an eyewitness account from Mr. Brown's friend. And then he shoots Michael somewhere in the chest or arm. He takes off running, apparently. And the officer chases him and fires another shot and hits him in the back. Michael then turns around, puts his hands up. The officer shoots him 5 or 6 more times. Now, again, this is an account from Mr. Brown's friend, so we haven't had any kind of counter telling from the officer, but that's what we have so far. So Michael Brown is shot and on the ground, and this officer, Wilson, did not report the shooting or call for emergency medical help. There are audio recordings that were released last week and confirmed as authentic, in which a St. Louis County police dispatcher seems unaware that an officer was involved in the shooting. She noted that she received 2 calls about an officer-related shooting, and she tried to get confirmation from the police in Ferguson, and her what she says is, "We just called Ferguson back again, and they don't know anything about it." So obviously the police department either didn't know about it or weren't going to say anything about it. And then the accounts get very sketchy. But, of course, according to their telling, Brown was the aggressor. The chief of police, John Belmar, said that Brown reached for Wilson's gun and a shot was fired inside the vehicle. But the police chief, Jackson, gives a lot of conflicting accounts. In releasing the video of the robbery, he seemed to be implying a connection between the robbery, that the police officer knew that the robbery had taken place and he was going after Brown. But then the Police Chief Jackson reverses himself and says there isn't a connection, and they didn't know. And then, a few hours later, he says Wilson saw the cigars in Brown's hand and realized he might be the robber. But apparently he never said anything like, "Did you rob that store? Are you coming from that store?" or anything of that nature. And the boy's body was lying in the street for hours, uncovered for most of the time. They've performed autopsies on the body now, and we don't have any information about what those autopsies revealed from the lawyers who are representing Mr. Brown's parents. So, all of these things have led to a very volatile situation, to say the least. There was calm for a while as President Obama stepped in to say that, the police should not be using military-style gear to attack protesters, and protesters should not be getting violent. So that changed the tone for a bit, and the police seemed to change their tactics. They brought in an African American. I believe he's part of the state troopers, and his presence seemed to calm folks down, make them feel better. But now, just today, the mayor has, last night, declared a curfew. So in essence, basically, this town has been in lockdown. This town has been under siege. This town has been under martial law. And this is causing more anxiety. There's been looting on the one hand, then there's streams of tear gas being shot at people, and it's a very disturbing scene. And trying to get perspective on this is difficult. But here's what I get. And as I always mention, when we talk about these things, we are creating little circumstances, as I call them holograms, that help us to explore who and what we really are and understand the nature of our false beliefs, the nature of our belief in separatism, and all of those things. And this is no different. This is a study in fear and what it does to people on all sides of the issue. When you have an armed response in the way the Ferguson Police Department had an armed response, as if you were invading a small country, that's fear. They're terrified. When you have riots in the streets, or even just protesters, that's fear. Now, there are some who will just take advantage of the situation to loot and steal. And the reason they do this is because the level of economic disparity, shall we say, in that town is large, very large. These are people who don't have much, and any chance they have to get something, It's very tempting to do. So you have that. But these are all fear-driven things. Fear of oppression, fear of being murdered in the streets, fear of, poverty, fear of lack, belief in lack. And then, of course, the fear of the police. They're terrified that there's going to be an uprising that is going to, bring them down. So fear is the issue. Fear is the thing. And what has to happen is moving from fear, being able to reach out, being able to recognize the fear of the other, and somehow address that fear. That's hard to do. It's hard to do when a wall of authority stands between you. So our prayers for Ferguson, our intention for Ferguson, is a greater awareness on the part of the police officers there and on the part of the citizens there of what needs to happen to live in a way that will provide protection for everyone. That's where we're at. And I've spent much longer on this story than I expected to, but it is something that's, I think, an important story. And of course the other one is the tragic passing of a beloved figure, a beloved comic and actor and entertainer, Robin Williams, by his own hand, as we understand. And there's been a lot of discussion about depression. He was battling depression as well as battling alcoholism, which is often a way that people who have depression self-medicate. He'd been in rehab. And then there were also reports from his wife that he had learned that he'd had, or the beginning stages of, Parkinson's disease. And I think that, coupled with the depression and the fact that many of the things that he was trying to do in his career weren't going so well. He'd had a TV series and that had been canceled, and I think he had some financial difficulties that he was concerned about. And of course, when you view these things through the distorted lenses that depression provides you, well, it can all seem overwhelming. And apparently it was more than he wanted to deal with, and he'd had enough. But what I remember about Robin Williams, lots of things I've been remembering about him. But one of my favorite of his movies was a movie called What Dreams May Come. And in that movie, it's an exploration of metaphysical concepts and, life after death. And suicide. Its view of life after death, its view of the concepts of heaven and hell are extraordinarily different from, I think, anything that's ever been done on film. They are not the traditional views of, Christian views of heaven and hell. They are, I guess people would call them New Agey. It's the idea that we are creating through the state of our mind either a joyous heaven or a hellish nightmare. And in the course of this movie, Robin Williams, who plays a professor, is dealing with some tragic circumstances. Their children, he's married, and their children die in an accident, which sends his wife spiraling into depression, where she has to be in a mental health facility for quite some time. And as she begins to recover, as she begins to come back to him, he has an accident and he dies. And the rest of the film follows his journey into the afterward world, for want of a better term. And he has a guide along his way, a spirit guide, played by Cuba Gooding Jr., who explains to him how he's creating it all. He's creating this magnificent place. And elements from his life, his wife's watercolor paintings come to life, and he's actually walking through them and living in them. And his dog, who passed away, comes out of nowhere and joins him. And it's really quite a remarkable work. But what happens is he discovers that his wife had been in such despair after his passing that she committed suicide, and she now is created her own sort of dark prison, and his journey is to journey into her prison to see if he can reach her and break her free of it. And it's a really exciting story. The novel is terrific too. I highly recommend it. But I wanted to use that to talk about this idea of a journey into the afterlife. Because there's, as we've been talking about, research on all of these issues that are, very compelling and yet either ignored or pushed aside. There's terrific evidence that, there is a journey that we take out of our bodies. And this research is being done on NDEs, near-death experiences. Now, the near-death experiences, I'm sure you probably are aware, it's a life-changing event that happens usually in an illness, in a state of unconsciousness. The features of it are an out-of-body experience, traveling through a tunnel, all of which, by the way, Robin does in the film. Seeing a light. And there's been a quest to find answers about this, because these are recorded experiences from many, many people. And there's two schools of thought, of course. One is the neurological school of thought, that these near-death experiences are nothing but neurological phenomena. The sense of being out of the body, the tunnel, the light, all the strange things are some kind of a hallucination that's caused by electric stimuli, lack of oxygen, stress, medication, or a combination of all of those things. And the neurological explanation identifies the brain as producing these symptoms. But also as consciousness, which is interesting. Now, the second explanation, of course, is the supernatural explanation, that there's an unknown world or reality outside our known reality. In this theory, the brain is thought to be receiving from a presumably vast and endless cosmic consciousness. And when people experience near-death experiences, they are therefore connected with cosmic consciousness. However, there's a gentleman there is a lady, Dr. Maureen Vencelar, who has done incredible research, and says that she has a theory that comes somewhere between those two, because she feels that both those theories don't consider the link between the severity of the trauma or sickness that leads to the near-death experience, nor do either one of them address the idea that the near-death experience becomes more profound and more complete as the trauma or sickness grows more life-threatening. These statements do not conform to the opinions of NDE experts, and neither theory takes into consideration that the NDE has successive phases. So she has developed the 5-phase theory that happens during a near-death experience. So next week, we will further explore this idea of the near-death experience and what it may mean. As for Robin's passing, I believe, as I always say, when we have the passing of someone that touches so many lives, that galvanizes people's attention, there's a reason. There's a reason he was here with us. There's a reason he passed the way he chose to pass. And that was to give us something. To give us something to think about. To give us something to understand. To give us something to expand our awareness. Many people found it startling that a man that seemed to be so full of life, a man that gave so much laughter to people, could be so tortured inside. And it seems that he was. And this passing is a way for us to understand that. But I think it's also a way to understand, looking back at his films, and if you go back to look at the films that he did and the kinds of things he talked about, like What Dreams May Come, there's a spiritual element to this man that is very profound. And I think as we meditate and think more about Robin, that will have a profound effect too on many, many people. Perhaps we'll get to talk about that next week too, but for now, our half hour of allotted time is up. And so I must say adieu for another week. And I wish that you travel towards the light.